The first snow came 3 weeks early, trapping 2 grain carts and 30 travellers on the northern pass. Agnes Vale knew the burned bakehouse could still feed them. She had managed royal ovens through sieges, funerals, and famine winters. But Quartermaster Cedric Vane had sealed the grain under military authority and ordered every sack sent to the border forts. "The army eats first," he told her, "or soon none of these villages will exist." He was not entirely wrong. Yet when Agnes entered the ruined oven to clear its flue, she found old ration marks carved into the bricks and a royal emblem someone had tried to chisel away. By sunset, Cedric's soldiers had surrounded the bakehouse. Agnes had been dismissed with nothing that morning. Before nightfall, the crown was threatening her over an oven it claimed was worthless. That morning had begun with the sound of copper pans being taken from their hooks. Agnes had heard that sound every winter for 40 years. Usually it meant the servants were scouring the royal kitchens before the first great feast of the season. This time, the pans were not being cleaned, they were being counted. 2 young clerks stood near the hearth with wax tablets in their hands. Behind them, the new household steward inspected shelves, ovens, knives, spits, and storage jars, as if the kitchen had been abandoned by careless tenants rather than governed by Agnes since before he was born. The palace kitchens occupied 3 stone chambers beneath the eastern hall. Even at dawn, they were hot enough to mist the windows, bread cooled on wooden racks, onions softened in iron pots. A scullery maid struggled to lift a cauldron twice the width of her shoulders. Agnes crossed the room, took the other handle, and helped her settle it onto the low hearth. "Bend your knees," she said. "Not your back." The girl nodded quickly. She was 14, perhaps 15, and still afraid of every raised voice. Agnes remembered when fear had left her, as quickly as heat left an open oven. She had once known every servant by the sound of their step, and every noble by what they refused to eat in public. She had planned meals for 300 soldiers, with half the promised barley. She had kept soup boiling through a fever winter, when half the kitchen slept on straw beside the walls. She had believed that years of usefulness created a place no one could take from her. The new steward cleared his throat. Agnes Vale. He did not call her mistress of the ovens. The kitchen quieted one sound at a time. A knife stopped against a board. A ladle ceased scraping the bottom of a pot. Even the fire seemed to shrink. Agnes wiped flour from her hands. Yes? The steward held a folded sheet of parchment. Its lower edge bore the red wax of the Royal Household Office, though not the Queen's personal seal. By order of the reorganised household, the kitchens will be placed under the direction of Master Holland of Whitebridge. A broad man standing beside the clerks inclined his head. He wore a fur-edged coat unsuitable for a working kitchen, and boots that had never crossed a floor slick with spilled fat. Agnes looked at him, then at the parchment. "And my place? There is no longer a place, carrying your former duties." The words were careful. They had been chosen to avoid saying she was dismissed. Agnes waited. The steward shifted his weight. "Your service is recognised. Is it?" A few of the younger servants looked at the floor. The steward continued. "You will receive 1 mule from the lower stable, a blanket, and use of a crown shelter on Grey Glass Pass." Agnes thought she had misunderstood. What shelter? A former royal bakehouse at Ashmore. Someone near the flour bins inhaled sharply. Agnes knew the name. Everyone who had served the northern household knew it. Ashmore Bakehouse had burned 19 years earlier. The road passing it was used only when spring floods closed the valley route. The roof had partly fallen. No keeper had lived there since the fire. The steward held out a ring of keys. Most of the hooks were empty. Only 1 key remained. It was long, blackened, and pitted with rust. Agnes did not take it. "What of my unpaid quarter wages?" The steward looked past her, as if the answer might be written on the steam. "Those accounts are under review. My bed in the women's chamber, required for incoming household staff. My winter clothes. You may retain what is personally yours." She owned 2 wool dresses, 1 pair of boots, 3 linen shifts, a bone comb, and a small knife whose handle had been worn smooth by her mother. 40 years in the palace had left Agnes with fewer possessions than the young clerk's writing box. She became aware of the servants watching her. Some looked frightened, some ashamed. A few looked relieved that the blow had fallen elsewhere. Agnes had spent her life making dismissal easy for other people. She never argued over extra work. She never complained when her name vanished from feast accounts. She slept beside the ovens during emergencies and returned to her narrow bed before anyone could notice she had been gone. When meat spoiled, she found another meal. When grain arrived wet, she dried it. When servants made mistakes, she corrected them quietly so the household would not punish them. She had called it service. Now she wondered whether she had merely trained the palace to believe she required nothing. The steward extended the keys again. Agnes took them. The metal was cold despite the heat of the room. "Will I be permitted to finish the morning bread?" she asked. Master Holland stepped forward. "That will not be necessary." His voice was not cruel. That made it worse. Agnes unpinned the iron badge marking her as mistress of the royal ovens. She placed it beside the bread knife. For an instant, she thought someone might speak. No one did. She walked to the servants' chamber, packed her clothing into a grain sack, and returned through the kitchen without looking toward the hearths she had governed for most of her life. At the outer door, the young scullery maid caught up with her. The girl pressed something into Agnes's hand. It was a heel of warm bread. "I hid it before Master Holland counted the loaves," she whispered. Agnes should have told her never to steal from a royal kitchen. Instead, she closed the girl's fingers around the bread and pushed it back. "You will need it before noon." The girl's eyes filled. Agnes turned away before her own could do the same. The mule waiting in the lower stable was grey around the muzzle and stiff in one hind leg. A stable boy helped tie Agnes's sack behind the saddle. "Her name is Bristle," he said. "She bites when frightened. So do most sensible creatures." The boy almost smiled. Agnes led the mule through the lower gate just after sunrise. The palace stood above her on a hill of pale stone, its windows bright with early fire. Smoke rose from the kitchen chimneys in straight dark columns. For 40 years, that smoke had told Agnes where she belonged. She did not look back a second time. The road north crossed farmland stripped bare after harvest. Frost silvered the ditches. Crows pecked at the remains of barley stalks. Agnes passed tenant families gathering fallen branches before the crown foresters arrived to drive them away. By midday, the sky had turned the color of old iron. A convoy approached from the opposite direction, 6 carts guarded by mounted soldiers. The carts sagged beneath sacks of grain. Each bore the painted wheel and sword emblem of the Royal Provisioning Office. Villagers stood beside the road as the convoy passed. A woman held a wooden bowl toward the soldiers. No one stopped. A child ran after the last cart until his mother caught him by the arm. Agnes watched the grain disappear southward. That seemed wrong. Greywatch Fort lay north. She turned to an old man carrying kindling. "Where are those carts bound?" "Royal Mills at Caster's Ford," he said. "The quartermaster says the grain must be weighed again. Why not mill it nearer the fort?" The man spat into the ditch. "Ask a man with a seal." Agnes continued uphill. By late afternoon, the road narrowed between dark pines. The wind moved through them, with a sound like distant surf. Snow began as a few hard grains that struck Agnes's face and melted. Greyglass Pass opened beyond the trees, a long rise between 2 ridges of black stone. The bakehouse stood where the road bent toward the north. It was larger than Agnes had expected. Even burned, it had dignity. The main building was built from grey stone blocks, with a wide central chimney and 2 lower wings. Half the slate roof had collapsed inward. The doors hung crooked beneath a carved lintel stained by smoke. Behind the bakehouse stood a roofless stable, a dry well, and the remains of a timber shed. A weathered plaque had been fixed beside the entrance. Ashmore Royal Bakehouse, destroyed by riot and fire in the 19th year of King Harold's reign. The final line had nearly vanished beneath soot. Agnes inserted the blackened key into the lock. It turned after 3 attempts. The door opened inward with a groan. cold ash stirred across the floor. The entry chamber smelled of wet stone, old smoke, and something faintly sour. Broken shelves leaned against the wall. A long work table had split down the middle. Birds had nested in the rafters above the surviving roof. Agnes stood in silence. The place was not empty. It held the remains of work. A rusted peel lay beneath fallen timber. Clay jars still stood in wall niches. A row of hooks had once supported scales, baskets, and breadcloths. Near the back wall, a stone trough fed into a blocked channel. Agnes set down her sack. She began with the roof, not to repair it. That would require carpenters, timber, slate, rope, and money. But she could determine where rain entered and which walls were stable. She tested the floor with the handle of her knife. She inspected the main chimney from below. She cleared broken tiles from one side chamber and found a section where the ceiling remained sound. By dusk, she had made a narrow sleeping place against an inner wall. She gathered fallen wood from the stable, coaxed a fire into a shallow stone basin, and warmed water in a dented iron pot she found beneath the shelves. The mule stood under the remaining stable roof, chewing dry grass. Agnes ate half an onion and the last corner of hard cheese from her sack. When darkness settled over the pass, she heard the wind change. It came first from the west, then twisted sharply north. The chimney moaned, snow hissed through the broken roof. Agnes pulled her blanket around her shoulders. On the wall opposite the sleeping chamber, someone had carved 12 small hooks into a wooden beam. They matched the empty spaces on her keyring. She rose and crossed the room. Each hook bore a symbol: a sheaf, a thorn branch, a bell, a fish, a wheel, a crescent moon. 12 marks in all. 12 marks in all. Agnes touched the last one. The wood had been polished by years of use. The hooks had once held 12 keys, not one. Before she could examine them further, a bell sounded somewhere up the pass. One heavy note, then another. Not a church bell, a storm bell. Agnes went outside. Snow swept across the road in pale sheets. Farther south, lanterns moved between the trees. She heard shouting, then the crack of wood and the frightened cry of a horse. She wrapped her cloak tightly and walked toward the sound. The first cart had lost a wheel beside the ditch. The second stood behind it, blocked by the narrow road. Both carried grain sacks beneath waxed cloth. Travellers had gathered around them. Merchants, 2 families, a monk, several labourers, and 3 soldiers whose cloaks bore the quartermaster's emblem. A young woman knelt beside a fallen horse. "It has not broken the leg," Agnes said. The woman looked up sharply. "How would you know?" "Because it would not be trying to kick you." The horse lashed out again. Agnes crouched near its head, speaking softly until it stopped striking. Together, they loosened the harness and helped the animal rise. The young woman had dark hair cut unevenly at the jaw and a scar across one knuckle. "I am Mara Thorn," she said. "The cart is mine. Agnes Vale." Mara glanced toward the bakehouse. "You live there? Since this afternoon. That is longer than anyone else managed." One of the soldiers approached. "Everyone stays with the carts until orders come from Grey Watch." A merchant pointed toward the snow. "We will freeze here. The bakehouse is unsafe." Agnes looked at the 30 people huddling beneath cloaks and cart covers. "The front chamber is unsafe," she said. "The western room is dry." The soldier frowned. "Quartermaster Vane sealed these sacks under military authority. No fire is to be lit near them. No one asked to burn the grain." Agnes turned and began walking toward Ashmore. Most of the travellers followed. The soldiers protested, but they could not reasonably force children and injured carters to remain beside the road. They ordered 2 men to guard the carts and accompanied the others to the bakehouse. Inside, Agnes divided the safest room with hanging cloth and broken boards. She gave the elderly travellers the dry corner. She placed children nearest the fire and made the stronger men carry stone from the doorway to block the wind. Mara watched her. "You speak like a woman accustomed to being obeyed. I speak like a woman accustomed to fires going out when people stand around asking permission." Mara smiled despite herself. Agnes collected handfuls of barley from the floor of the damaged cart. Not enough to count as stealing. Grain always escaped torn seams. She added it to her remaining onion and boiled a thin gruel. The smell made everyone quiet. There was not enough. Agnes knew that before the pot warmed. Each person received 3 spoonfuls. The children received 4. One soldier refused his portion and handed it to an old woman. Agnes remembered that. Afterward, Mara helped her inspect the damaged cart harness. The leather had torn near the buckle. Agnes found a length of plaited oven cord in the storage room. It had hardened with age, but remained strong enough to bind the strap temporarily. As she worked, a copper disc slipped from beneath Mara's collar. It hung on a leather string. The symbol stamped into it showed a thorn branch. Agnes looked toward the beam with the 12 hooks. "Where did you get that?" Mara closed her hand around the disc. "It belonged to my husband." "What is it?" "A bread mark." Agnes waited. Mara glanced at the soldiers, then lowered her voice. "My grandmother said, every household in Bracken Hollow once kept one. If the pass closed, we brought it here. The keeper gave bread according to the mark." "How much?" "No one remembers." "Why keep it?" "Because my grandmother kept hers. Because her mother did. Because poor people do not throw away things that once meant food." Agnes looked at the oven. The main baking chamber stood beyond a fallen arch. Soot covered the bricks from floor to crown. Several stones had cracked, but the base appeared stable. She lifted a lantern. Mara followed. The chamber was large enough for 3 people to stand upright inside. Agnes had worked royal ovens all her life, but she had never seen one built to this scale outside a military encampment. She held the lantern close to the inner wall. Beneath the soot were scratches. Number, not scratches, marks. Rows of short, straight cuts. Above them, faint but visible, was the outline of a thorn branch. Mara touched the copper disc hanging at her throat. Agnes moved the lantern. Beside the thorn branch was a bell. Farther on, a sheaf, a wheel. The same 12 symbols carved into the beam outside. Each had a different number of lines cut beneath it. Agnes's pulse quickened. Someone had counted bread here. Not batches. Allotments. A shout came from outside. Hooves struck the frozen road. Lantern light moved through the doorway. A man entered beneath a cloak, dusted white with snow. He was tall, narrow-faced and clean-shaven. His gloves were fine leather, but the mud on his boots showed he had ridden hard. The soldiers straightened. "Quartermaster Vane." Cedric Vane surveyed the room. His gaze passed over the travellers, the fire, the pot, and the damp cloaks hung near the walls. He did not shout. That made everyone listen more closely. "Who opened this building?" Agnes stepped out of the oven. "I did." Cedric looked at her black dress, flour-stained sleeves, and the iron badge she no longer wore. "Agnes Vale. You know me. I know the household accounts. Then you know I served the crown longer than most of your clerks have been alive. I also know you were released from service this morning." "Released?" Cedric's eyes settled on the copper token in Mara's hand. For the first time, his expression changed. Only slightly, but Agnes saw it. "You recognize this," she said. Cedric ignored the question. "These travellers may remain until the storm weakens. The grain stays sealed. No one is to enter the main oven again." "Why?" "The structure is condemned. Then why send me here?" a few travellers murmured. Cedric's jaw tightened. "The household granted you shelter, not authority." Agnes held the lantern toward the marked bricks. "What do these cuts mean?" Cedric did not look. "I have no concern with old scratches. You recognize the token. I recognize many objects found in Crown districts." "Then name this one." Mara stepped closer. Cedric's guards shifted. Cedric looked at the travellers and seemed to measure the effect of every possible answer. "The disc has no present legal force." "That was not my question." His voice hardened. "The road north is threatened. Greywatch and 2 smaller forts require every measure of grain collected under royal levy. Those sacks will move as soon as the carts are repaired. 30 people will remain here without food. They may return south when the road opens." It may not open for days. The army eats first. Cedric said it without pride. Or soon none of these villages will exist. The room fell silent. Agnes studied him. He believed it. This was not a man collecting grain for private profit. There was no softness in him, but neither was there simple greed. "What has been seen beyond the ridge?" Agnes asked. Cedric's gaze sharpened. "That is not kitchen business. Hungry soldiers are always kitchen business." For an instant, something like respect appeared in his expression. Then it vanished. 2 enemy scouting parties crossed the northern marker last week. Greywatch has grain for 6 weeks if the weather holds, and less if the lower storehouse remains damp. Agnes looked toward the grain carts outside. "How much is on the road?" "Enough to extend the ration." "For how long?" Cedric did not answer. Agnes knew then that he did not have enough. Not for the forts, the travellers, and the villages. Perhaps not for the forts alone. She stepped from the oven. "Let me inspect the bakehouse." "No. If it can operate, the grain can be milled and baked here. Bread travels more easily than wet sacks. The royal mills have already been chosen, south of the pass." Cedric's expression changed again. This time, Agnes saw irritation. She had noticed the carts travelling in the wrong direction. "You will not interfere with the provisioning plan. Then allow me to understand why a royal bakehouse built to serve 12 villages is being called worthless." Cedric turned toward his men. "At dawn, clear the eastern chamber and mark the unsafe walls. When the storm passes, this place will be pulled down." Mara swore under her breath. Agnes stood very still. "Why demolish it now?" "Because people have begun mistaking ruins for rights." Cedric stepped closer. His voice lowered so only Agnes could hear. "You spent 40 years inside a palace kitchen. You know what happens when every household claims its need is greater than the realm's. I know what happens when those deciding the ration do not see the empty bowls. And I know what happens when soldiers reach the wall too weak to lift a shield." There was history in the words. Agnes heard it, but did not yet understand it. Cedric turned away. "You have until morning to leave the main building." He walked outside into the snow. The soldiers remained. The travellers whispered. Mara looked at Agnes. "What will you do?" Agnes stared into the oven. All her life, decisions had arrived from elsewhere. A steward ordered a feast. A prince demanded meat during Lent. A physician ordered thin broth. A commander demanded bread by sunrise. Agnes had always solved the problem placed before her. She had never decided which problems deserved to be obeyed. She took the blackened key from her belt. Then she crossed the entry chamber and closed the outer door. The lock turned with a heavy click. The soldiers stared at her. Agnes faced them. "No one breaks this door while children are sleeping behind it." One of the soldiers rested a hand on his sword. The older soldier, the one who had given away his gruel, placed his hand on the younger man's arm. "Not tonight," he said. Agnes returned to the oven. By morning, the snow had deepened to the height of a man's ankle. The travellers woke cold and hungry. Cedric's soldiers allowed no one to touch the grain carts. Agnes used the last of the spilled barley to thicken hot water. It was not breakfast, but it kept hands steady. When daylight entered through the broken roof, Agnes began measuring the bakehouse. She used a length of oven cord knotted at the width of her hand. Mara followed with a piece of charcoal and marked numbers on a flat board. The main oven had 12 shallow niches around its outer wall. Each niche stood beneath one of the village symbols. The loading arch was broad enough for 3 bakers to work side by side. The cooling room contained stone ledges at several heights. A long exterior platform, partly buried beneath debris, could have held baskets or carts. "This was not built for the royal household," Agnes said. Mara rubbed her arms against the cold. "What does that prove? That it could produce more bread than a hunting party, manor, or garrison would need. Enough for 12 villages, if it ran continuously." Agnes crouched near the oven base. The lower bricks were thicker than those in the palace ovens. Their joints had been packed with clay and ash to hold heat. A secondary flue ran beneath the floor toward the western wall. She tapped the stone. Hollow. Mara knelt beside her. "A chamber?" An air channel. Perhaps two. Agnes followed it toward the collapsed side of the building. The channel divided beneath the floor, allowing the keeper to regulate heat without opening the main oven. Whoever had designed Ashmore understood emergency baking. Large batches, little fuel, constant use. Cedric returned near midday, with 6 more soldiers and 2 labourers carrying red marking chalk. He found Agnes inside the oven. "I gave you an order. You gave me until morning. It is morning, and the road remains closed." Cedric looked at Mara's measuring board. "You have no authority to inspect Crown property." Agnes stood. "Then why give me its key?" "Because someone in the household wished to avoid the appearance of throwing an old servant into the road." The words struck cleanly. Agnes felt them, but she did not let him see. "You believe this place has no value. I believe its value is less than the danger created by false hope." He pointed toward the labourers. "Mark the east wall." Agnes stepped between them and the oven. "No." Cedric's voice remained calm. "Move." The bakehouse was built for emergency bread. Many buildings outlived their first purpose. The villages continued paying a levy. Mara looked at Agnes. "You know that?" "I know the quartermaster's ledger lists Ashmore maintenance." Cedric's face revealed nothing. Agnes continued. "You collect grain and timber for a dead oven. The levy was absorbed into general northern defence. By whose authority? The Crown's." "Which Crown?" The labourers stopped. Cedric's eyes narrowed. Agnes had served long enough to know that a Crown order was not the same as the will of the reigning monarch. Departments, stewards, commanders and clerks all acted beneath the royal name. Sometimes with permission, sometimes through habit, sometimes because no one important had noticed. Cedric moved closer. "You are standing in an unstable ruin during military mobilization. Do not mistake an old kitchen title for legal standing." Agnes almost stepped back. That was what she had always done when men with seals reminded her of her place. Then Mara's copper token caught the light. Agnes thought of the child chasing the grain cart, of the empty bowl beside the road, of the scullery maid returning the stolen heel of bread because Agnes had trained her to obey. She turned to the soldiers and travellers. "This oven has 12 village marks," she said. "Its loading arches were built for 3 baking crews. Its cooling ledges were made for hundreds of loaves, not dozens, and the Crown still collects a levy bearing its name." Cedric spoke quietly. "Do not do this." Agnes looked at him. "Do what?" "Give desperate people a promise you cannot prove." He was right about one thing. She could not yet prove it. That did not mean the promise had never existed. Agnes raised the Blackened Key. "I will not surrender the oven until the trapped travellers are safe, and the meaning of these marks is known." Cedric's men waited for his order. Snow struck the broken roof and melted against the cold stones. "At last," Cedric said, "at first light tomorrow, this door will be opened, with or without your consent." He turned and left. Mara exhaled. "You just refused the royal quartermaster before witnesses." Agnes looked at the key in her hand. "Yes. How does it feel?" "Unwise." Mara laughed once. It was the first warm sound the bakehouse had held in 19 years. That afternoon, Cedric requested to speak with Agnes alone. They met in the ruined stable, where the wind entered through gaps in the boards. Bristle stood between them, chewing hay with grave concentration. Cedric carried a leather ledger beneath his cloak. He placed it on an overturned trough. "I was 11 when Black Hollow Fort ran out of grain," he said. Agnes had heard of Black Hollow. Everyone had. The garrison had surrendered during a border rising. Nearly 200 soldiers and civilians died during the retreat. "My father was assistant storekeeper," Cedric continued. "He signed figures he had not checked because every village claimed hardship, every lord delayed his levy, and every clerk believed someone else would replace what was missing." Agnes said nothing. On the 9th day, the soldiers boiled saddle leather. On the 11th, men began deserting. On the 12th, the eastern gate was opened from inside. Cedric rested one gloved hand on the ledger. "I do not permit missing grain. That does not make every civilian request an act of sabotage. No, it makes every division of the reserve a risk." He opened the ledger. Columns of figures covered the page. Grain from 6 districts, losses by damp, cart capacity, fort rations, horse fodder, milling time. Agnes leaned closer. Cedric pointed to the lower lines. Greywatch has 6 weeks, Northbar has 4, the Ridge Tower has enough for 23 days. If the scouts beyond the border are followed by a larger force, the road may close until spring. And the villages? The villages are expected to store their own winter grain. They paid the Ashmore levy. They paid a royal levy whose purpose changed after the fire. Was that change proclaimed? No. Recorded. Not in a form that matters now. Then you continued taking payment for a duty you chose not to perform. Cedric closed the ledger. I continued collecting supplies for the defense that keeps those villages alive, without telling them. If I explained every calculation to every carter, widow, miller, and priest, no grain would reach the fort before summer. You confuse explanation with surrender, and you confuse compassion with abundance. Agnes looked toward the bakehouse. Through the broken stable wall, she could see travelers gathering snow to melt. A child held a wooden cup beneath the roof edge. How many sacks are in the 2 carts? She asked. 48. How many are dry? Cedric frowned. All were inspected. That was not my question. He did not answer. Agnes had seen the dark stain at the bottom of 3 sacks. Grain loaded damp weighed more and spoiled faster. If Cedric's totals counted wet grain as usable grain, his reserve was smaller than he believed. Or larger, if loss had already been deducted twice. Let me examine the figures, she said. No, you came to show them to me. I came to show you why the oven cannot be allowed to claim part of the supply. Then you wanted me to understand. I wanted you to yield. Agnes met his eyes. Those are not the same thing. Cedric lifted the ledger. For a moment, she thought he would leave. Instead, he opened it again. You have until the light fails. Agnes carried the ledger into the bakehouse and placed it on the split work table. For the next 2 hours, she read figures written by men who assumed kitchens were simple places. They had counted sacks, carts, and days. They had not counted ovens. Milling losses differed by grain quality. Wet barley required longer drying. Flour occupied less cart space, but spoiled differently. Soldiers working on half rations consumed more fuel because tasks took longer. Horses fed poor fodder weakened, slowing the carts that carried the grain intended to save them. Agnes had lived among such consequences. She found 3 entries for grain sent from Renford. 1 recorded departure from the village. 1 recorded arrival at Caster's Ford. 1 recorded assignment to Greywatch. The same 40 sacks appeared 3 times in 3 different parts of the total. She marked the lines with crumbs of charcoal. Then she found damp loss deductions applied, before milling and again after transport. Cedric's system did not merely underestimate the supply. In some places, it counted grain twice. In others, it lost the same grain twice. Agnes rubbed her eyes. The palace clerks had often done this. They saw records as separate truths, instead of one loaf moving through many hands. Mara stood near the fire, watching her. Can you read all that? I can read enough. What does it say? That the quartermaster is both richer and poorer than he believes. That sounds like royal arithmetic. Agnes almost smiled. Before she could explain, Prior Ansel arrived from the Roadside Priory. He was a narrow man, with a reddish beard and a habit patched at both elbows. He carried dried herbs, 2 blankets, and a small sack of peas. The storm bell sounded yesterday, he said. We would have come sooner, but the lower road iced. He recognized Agnes's name. More importantly, he recognized Mara's token. We have one like it in the Priory chest, he said. Agnes rose too quickly. Why? Offerings from Bracken Hollow used to pass through our storehouse. Do you have records? Ansel hesitated. Some. Cedric closed the ledger before the prior could see it. What records? Rent rolls, tithe accounts, nothing of military value. Agnes looked at the snow beyond the door. The priory lay 4 miles south. The road was difficult but passable on foot. We need to see them. Cedric shook his head. No one leaves while the weather is worsening. You sent riders to Greywatch this morning. My riders carried official messages. And we carry a question about a crown levy. Cedric's expression hardened. Agnes expected another refusal. Instead, he looked at the travellers, then at the sky. 2 soldiers go with you. You return before dark. Mara pulled on her cloak. Agnes closed the supply ledger. Cedric placed one hand over it. You are not taking that. I have seen enough. Have you? Agnes looked at the charcoal marks beside the repeated entries. Cedric followed her gaze. His face remained still, but he understood. You count Renford grain 3 times, Agnes said softly, then deduct some losses twice. The words landed between them. Cedric closed the ledger. You misread military tables. Perhaps. He knew she had not. The road to the Priory followed a line of standing stones beneath the pines. Snow reached Agnes's ankles by the time they arrived. The Priory was little more than a chapel, kitchen, stable, and 2 low buildings enclosed by a stone wall. Travellers used it when storms closed the pass. Prior Ansel led Agnes and Mara into a record room smelling of beeswax and damp parchment. There was once a full register for Ashmore, he said. It vanished after the fire. Vanished? Taken, burned, misplaced. Men use different words depending on how much blame they wish to carry. He opened a chest and removed several rolled accounts. The first listed barley received from the northern villages. Bracken Hollow, 6 measures and 4 bundles of wood. Belmere, 8 measures. Renford, 10. One entry appeared beside each village symbol. Agnes found the thorn branch. How recent is this? Last harvest. Mara stared. We still pay. The levy is collected with the winter tithe. No one told us it was for Ashmore. Ansel looked ashamed. The heading remained. The purpose was rarely explained. Agnes moved through the rolls. The same entries appeared year after year. Grain, timber, Labour Days. Even after the bakehouse burned. Even after its roof collapsed. Even after the Crown declared it useless. They took everything required to maintain it, Mara said, then left it to rot. Prior Ansel folded his hands. The supplies were redirected to the forts. By whose order? Agnes asked. I never saw one. What happened the night of the fire? Ansel looked toward the chapel wall. I was a novice. That was not my question. His mouth tightened. People came from the villages because the pass had closed. The previous harvest had been poor. There was grain inside Ashmore, but soldiers guarded it. Whose soldiers? The old king's northern household. Did the villagers attack? There was shouting. Did they set the fire? I did not see who struck the first flame. Mara stepped nearer. What did you see? Ansel's voice dropped. The doors were barred. From inside? Agnes asked. Ansel looked at her. No. The room became very quiet. Why did you never say so? I was 18. The prior ordered us to remain neutral. Neutral between hungry people and a barred door. Ansel flinched. The words were cruel. Agnes knew it even as she spoke them. She had spent 40 years being neutral in rooms where servants vanished after speaking too loudly. She had no right to pretend courage had always been easy. Make a copy of the levy entries, she said more gently. Ansel glanced toward the soldiers waiting outside. If the quartermaster sees, he will see your name, mine, Mara's, and the date. We will not hide where it came from. Ansel looked surprised. Agnes understood why. The old Agnes would have concealed the copy in her clothing. She would have treated secrecy as safety. But hidden evidence could be dismissed as stolen, altered, or invented. Write plainly, she said, and write who requested it. Ansel prepared parchment and ink. They returned to Ashmore near sunset. Smoke rose from a new fire outside the building. Cedric's labourers were pulling grain sacks from the carts. Red marks had been painted across the eastern wall. One line formed a cross. Another showed where ropes would be fixed when demolition began. Agnes walked through the gathering snow towards Cedric. The villagers continued paying the Ashmore levy after the fire. Cedric held out his hand. Prior Ansel gave him the copied entries. He read them once. Then he folded the parchment and placed it inside his coat. "That belongs to the Crown record. It belongs to the truth," Mara said. Cedric ignored her. Agnes pointed toward the marked wall. "The bakehouse cannot be demolished until the levy is examined. It can be demolished because it is unsafe. Then stop your men from removing the stones that might show what happened here. What happened here is recorded on the plaque. A starving mob burned it. Yes, while the doors were barred from outside." Cedric's gaze moved to Ansel. The prior lowered his eyes. Cedric said, "Memory after 19 years is not proof." "No," Agnes replied, "but iron remembers heat." She walked to the main doorway. The lower hinges had warped. The exterior bolts were scorched, darkest on the side facing the road. The wood around them had burned toward the center of the door. Agnes had seen kitchen fires spread through storerooms. Fire marked the direction it traveled. It consumed air, pulled smoke, blackened stone, differently on the side from which it came. She touched the twisted bolt. If the mob burned the building from inside, the outer face would not carry the deepest scorching. Cedric joined her. The doors may have fallen. They did not fall until the iron softened. Mara lifted a piece of charred wood from beneath the stone plaque. The inner surface was black. The outer edge had burned pale and deep. Agnes looked at the oven marks, the 12 niches, the loading arches, and the village token in Mara's hand. The pieces aligned. Not perfectly. Not yet. But enough. The bakehouse had not been a private royal kitchen. It had been an emergency duty. The villages provided grain, timber, and labor. In return, the Crown opened Ashmore when winter closed the pass. 19 years earlier, the Crown had taken the grain and barred the people outside. The fire had not destroyed the arrangement. It had hidden the failure. Agnes turned toward the travelers, villagers, soldiers, and laborers gathered in the snow. "This place was built to feed the pass," she said. Cedric's face hardened. "You cannot establish that from scratches and village tales. The symbols match the tokens. The niches match the villages." The levy continued. The oven was built for thousands of loaves. And even if every word is true, the forts still require grain now. Agnes looked at him. For the first time, her goal became clear. Saving the travelers was no longer enough. Stopping demolition was no longer enough. The duty itself had to be restored. Not as charity. Not as a favor granted by a sympathetic official. As a promise the Crown had continued to charge for while refusing to honor. "The villagers paid," Agnes said. "The Crown collected. The duty remains." Cedric stepped closer. "If you force this claim in the middle of mobilization, other districts will resist their levies. Forts will go hungry. Men will die on the walls. Then help me find a way to feed both. There is no both when the grain is finite. There is always a choice in how grain is dried, milled, carried, stored, and baked. You think kitchens can solve war? No." Agnes glanced toward the soldiers unloading sacks. "But kitchens decide how long armies can pretend they are not starving." Cedric's mouth tightened. He turned to the laborers. "Begin at sunrise." Then he looked at Agnes. "Remove her from the building before nightfall." The soldiers did not move immediately. Neither did Agnes. Snow settled on her hair and shoulders. She thought of the palace steward telling her there was no longer a place carrying her former duties. She thought of the royal grain ledger and the repeated Renford entries. Cedric believed he had 6 weeks. Agnes believed he did not know what he had. And for the first time in her life, being dismissed from the royal kitchens meant she no longer needed permission to say so. She walked past Cedric and entered Ashmore. On the split work table, she spread scraps of charcoal, bits of broken tile, and a handful of dry beans. Each bean became a grain cart. Each tile became a mill. Each charcoal line became a road. Mara followed her inside. "What are you doing?" Agnes placed the first bean beside Renford. "I am counting the quartermaster's grain." He took the ledger. "I have carried larger inventories in my head." Outside, Cedric's men fixed ropes to the eastern wall. Inside, Agnes began rebuilding the Crown's entire northern ration plan from memory. Agnes placed the first bean beside Renford. Then another, beside Caster's Ford. A third, she set near Greywatch. Mara stood across the work table, arms folded against the cold, while Agnes rebuilt the northern ration plan from memory. The beans represented grain shipments. Broken tile marked storehouses. Short charcoal lines showed the roads between villages, mills, and forts. Agnes arranged them, moved them, and began again whenever the pattern contradicted itself. Outside, labourers tightened ropes around the eastern wall. Each pull sent dust whispering from the rafters. Mara looked toward the door. They mean to bring it down with us inside. Not tonight. You sound very certain. They need daylight to judge where the stones will fall. That is comforting. Agnes ignored the remark. She closed her eyes and pictured Cedric's ledger. Renford had sent 40 sacks. The same 40 appeared again at Caster's Ford after weighing. Then they appeared a third time beneath the Greywatch allocation. Cedric's clerks had not intended to invent grain. They had recorded each stage separately, then combined tables that were never meant to be added together. Agnes removed 2 beans. She set 6 beside a black tile, representing damp loss. Then she paused. No, she murmured. What? The damp grain. Mara leaned closer. Was worse than he thought. Better in one account, worse in another. That explains nothing. It means the same damage was deducted twice. Agnes restored 3 beans. She added smaller pieces of charcoal for flour after milling. The road to Caster's Ford went south before returning north. It added 2 days to every shipment and forced grain through a mill already serving royal households in the lower valley. What mills lie north of Bracken Hollow? Agnes asked. Oakmere has one, water-driven, when the stream has not frozen. Belmere, a hand mill at the manor, and 2 smaller stones in the village. Renford, windmill. Agnes looked toward the snow pressing against the broken shutters. Useless in heavy ice. She rearranged the beans again. Mara watched for several moments. You truly remember all those figures? I remember enough to know where men have confused writing with food. A rope creaked outside. Stone scraped against stone. Agnes's hand stopped. She had spent her life correcting errors without naming the person who made them. A kitchen could not wait for wounded pride to heal. If a steward miscounted geese, she changed the menu. If a clerk recorded 2 barrels where there was 1, she stretched the broth. She had protected the household from its mistakes so thoroughly that the household never learned she was the one protecting it. This time, concealment would serve no one. She looked at Mara. Find me the oldest soldier willing to listen. Mara's eyebrows rose. That is your plan. It is the beginning. The older soldier who had surrendered his gruel entered a few minutes later. His name was Hob Rennick. He had served Greywatch for 16 years and had the flattened nose of a man who had once met a shield at speed. He studied the table. Are we invading somewhere? We are feeding somewhere, Agnes said. Which is more difficult? She pointed to the beans near Greywatch. How many mouths at the fort? 212 soldiers, 30 stable hands, cooks, smiths, and servants. More if the ridge patrols are recalled. How many horses? 47. Cattle, 6 oxen, though 2 are lame. How many ovens? Hob hesitated. 1 main oven. Condition, cracked. Capacity. He looked embarrassed. It makes bread. So does a flat stone in a fire. How many loaves? I do not know. Agnes had expected that. Who does? The fort baker. Name? Pella Nor. Can she write? Better than I can. Agnes gave him a flat piece of board and a charcoal stub. Send a rider when the road allows it. Ask Pella for the oven's daily capacity, the number of bakers, the flour remaining, and how much fuel she uses per firing. Hob looked toward the soldiers outside. Quartermaster Vane gave no order. No, I did. He stared at her. Agnes stared back. After a moment, the corner of his mouth moved. I will see what can be done. Cedric returned before dawn. He entered Ashmore without knocking, snow melting on his shoulders, and found Agnes seated beside the table. Mara slept near the fire. Prior Ansel lay in the western room beneath 2 blankets. The travellers murmured in their sleep. Cedric looked at the beans. You have made a game of my accounts. A game would have clearer rules. He came closer. Agnes pointed to the first group. Renford grain was counted on departure, again after weighing, and again when assigned to Greywatch. That cannot be correct. It is written in 3 different tables. They record 3 different stages. Then they should not be added together. Cedric's eyes moved over the arrangement. Agnes pointed to the damp loss marks. You deducted spoilage before milling, then your mill clerk deducted it again when flour yield fell. That clerk reports actual flour. Without stating the first deduction, Cedric said nothing. Agnes continued. Your fort reserve is smaller than the total written at the bottom of the page, but larger than the usable amount in your emergency column. You do not have 6 clean weeks. You may have 5.5, perhaps 6 if the damp sacks are dried now instead of hauled south. Cedric lifted one bean and turned it between his fingers. You expect me to trust calculations made from memory, with beans? No. I expect you to inspect your own ledger, and if you are wrong, then demolish the oven after the storm. His gaze hardened. You are in no position to bargain. I am in the only position that matters. I know what your numbers mean when they become meals. Outside, a horse stamped against the frozen ground. Cedric set down the bean. What do you propose? Agnes felt Mara wake behind her. She kept her eyes on Cedric. Dry the wet sacks here. Send barley north for porridge and coarse bread. Mill the clean wheat at Oakmere, while water still moves. Use Belmere's hand mills for emergency flour. Stop hauling everything south before bringing it north again. You would divide the grain among village mills during mobilization. I would divide the work, and trust 12 communities not to keep a little for themselves. They have given grain and timber to Ashmore for 19 years without receiving what they were owed. That does not make them honest. No, hunger does not make them dishonest either. Cedric walked to the oven mouth. He studied the symbols carved into the bricks. You also want grain left here. Enough for travellers and villages when the pass closes. How much? Agnes answered immediately. 1 sack in 12 from the Ashmore levy, no more until the fort stores are measured properly. Mara sat up. That would not feed 12 villages for a week. No, Agnes said. It would keep the weakest alive long enough for roads to open. Cedric turned. And who controls it? 12 village representatives, 1 Priory witness, 1 officer from Greywatch, and the keeper of the Bakehouse. You, for now. He almost smiled, but there was no warmth in it. You were dismissed yesterday, and by sunrise you propose governing a crown reserve. I propose that no single person should govern it. That answer unsettled him more than a demand for ownership would have. Cedric returned to the table. For a moment, Agnes believed he might accept. Then he saw Hobbs' missing place near the door. Where is Rennick? Sending a question to the fort baker. Cedric's expression closed. You issued an order to one of my soldiers. I asked for information. You used my command structure without authority, because you would not. His voice became very quiet. This is why divided control fails. Every person with a good intention believes rules are obstacles meant for someone else. Agnes looked at the marked wall, and every official with a seal believes obedience proves wisdom. Cedric swept the beans from the table. They scattered across the floor. One rolled beneath the workbench. Another struck Mara's boot. The demolition begins at sunrise, he said. He turned to the soldiers. No grain leaves the carts except by my written order. No messenger rides without my seal. Anyone obstructing the convoy will be arrested. His gaze moved to Mara, especially those who have already delayed royal transport. Mara rose. You delayed my cart when you overloaded it. I requisitioned it. You put 12 extra sacks over a cracked axle. The axle broke because you failed to maintain it. My husband maintained that cart until your levy took him north in winter and brought him back under a blanket. The room went still. Cedric's expression did not change, but the muscles near his jaw tightened. This is not the place. It is exactly the place. Mara stepped toward him. Your men take grain, timber, horses, carts, and husbands, Then you tell us the army eats first, as if the army were not built from our own houses. 2 soldiers moved between them. Agnes caught Mara's sleeve. Not now. Mara pulled free. Cedric looked toward the door. Remove her. The soldiers hesitated. Cedric did not raise his voice. Mara Thorn is under arrest for obstructing a royal convoy. Hob had not yet returned. The younger soldiers took Mara by the arms. She did not struggle. Her anger was too cold for that. As they led her outside, she looked back at Agnes. Not pleading, waiting. Agnes had spent 40 years understanding what people needed before they asked. Now she did not know whether Mara needed rescue, resistance, or restraint. She followed them into the snow. Where will you take her? Grey Watch. The road is closed. The lower guard shelter. That roof is worse than this one. It has a lock. Cedric mounted his horse. Agnes stepped beside him. If you imprison the only carter who can repair the damaged wagon, your grain remains here. We have labourers. Labourers do not know her horse. Cedric looked toward the animal standing under the stable roof. Mara's mare had refused every soldier who approached. It flattened its ears and struck at unfamiliar hands. Agnes continued, "If you want the convoy moving, release her." Cedric's eyes narrowed. "You are bargaining again. I am describing consequence." For several breaths, neither moved. At last, Cedric said, "She remains under guard here until the road opens." Mara was taken to the western room, with a soldier outside the door. It was not freedom, but it was not the guard shelter. Agnes watched Cedric ride toward the carts. She had gained an inch by proving usefulness. The realization shamed her. Mara's freedom should not have depended on whether a horse required her hands. Agnes returned to the oven. The demolition labourers waited for Cedric's signal. One carried an iron pry bar, another held a mallet. Agnes looked at the marked bricks. If the wall came down, the clearest allotment cuts would vanish into rubble. Cedric would call them random. Rain and snow would complete what fire had begun. Prior Ansel joined her. "You cannot stop the men by standing here." "I know." "Then let the markings be copied." "Copied by whom?" "Cedric has the levy entries. He controls the soldiers. He can say we invented the pattern after seeing Mara's token." Ansel studied the oven. "The stones themselves are not the whole truth. They are the part he cannot rewrite." Agnes ran her fingers over the thorn symbol. Beneath it, 4 groups of cuts marked the old emergency ration. She imagined the labourer's mallet striking them. "No," she said. Ansel heard the decision in her voice. "What are you thinking? These bricks can be removed." His face changed. "Agnes, I have watched ovens rebuilt. The inner facing can be lifted if the arch is supported. Do you know how to support it?" "I know how it was built. That is not the same thing." Outside, Cedric raised one hand. The labourers approached the eastern wall. Agnes seized the pry bar from the nearest man. He stared at her. "Give me 1 hour." Cedric dismounted. "You have no hour. Then watch your evidence vanish. You have called it my evidence only when it serves you." Agnes stepped into the oven. The soldiers did not follow immediately. The chamber was narrow, black, and uncertain beneath the cracked vault. She wedged the pry bar into the mortar, around the first marked brick. Ansel stood at the entrance. "You need timber braces. There is no time. That arch carries the upper weight. The inner facing is separate. You do not know that." Agnes pressed harder. The mortar broke with a dry snap. The brick shifted. For one breath, she felt triumph. Then, a thin line of dust fell from the vault. Ansel saw it. "Stop!" Agnes pulled the brick free. The thorn symbol emerged intact. She placed it on the floor. The labourers watched. So did Cedric. Agnes moved to the bell mark. She told herself she needed only the 12 symbols. The rest could be reconstructed from the cuts that remained. She loosened the second brick. More dust fell. A quiet sound moved through the oven. Not a crack. A settling. Ansel entered. "That is enough. Take the first brick outside." "Agnes." "Take it." He bent to lift the stone. The vault shifted. Agnes heard the change before she saw it. A low grinding passed above them. She looked up. One of the cracked crown stones dropped the width of a finger. "Out," she said. Ansel straightened too quickly. His shoulder struck the pry bar. The metal fell. The sound seemed small. The collapse was not. The inner arch folded inward with a roar. Agnes threw herself toward Ansel. Stones struck her back and drove her to one knee. Smoke-black dust filled the chamber. Something heavy slammed into the floor where she had been standing. Hands seized her arms and dragged her toward the entrance. She could not see. She heard Mara shouting from behind the locked room. Soldiers pulled Agnes into the open air. She coughed until her throat burned. Ansel lay beside the doorway. Blood darkened his hair. For a terrible moment he did not move. Then he groaned. Mara broke past her guard and knelt beside him. "Cloth," she shouted. "Clean cloth." Agnes tore a strip from her linen sleeve. Mara pressed it to the wound. Cedric stood in the oven entrance as dust rolled around him. The marked wall had partly collapsed. The thorn brick remained intact on the floor outside. The bell symbol lay beneath a pile of broken stone. Most of the ration cuts had disappeared. Cedric turned toward Agnes. "What happened?" Her mouth tasted of ash. "The frost weakened the arch. The lie came before she chose it." Cedric looked at the pry bar beneath the rubble. Then at the brick Agnes had removed. No one spoke. Mara's face changed. Not because the lie deceived her, because it did not. Cedric picked up the thorn-marked brick. "You did this." Agnes said nothing. "You removed structural facing from a condemned oven after being warned. I was preserving the marks. You nearly killed a prior. I misjudged the arch. You lied." The word struck harder than the falling stone. Agnes looked at Mara. Mara kept pressure on Ansel's wound. Her voice was quiet. "You decided alone. There was no time. There was time to tell us. The soldiers were about to destroy it. So you destroyed it first." Agnes flinched. Cedric gave the brick to a soldier. "Seal the building." The labourers moved toward the doors. Agnes tried to stand. Pain spread across her back. "You cannot seal it. The travellers will be moved to the stable and guard tents. They will freeze. Then they will learn why unsafe structures are condemned." His anger was no longer controlled. It had become personal. "Agnes Vale, you are removed from Ashmore. If you enter again, you will be arrested." He looked toward Mara. "Release her." The soldiers unlocked the western room. Mara did not thank him. Cedric continued. "The convoy leaves when the axle is repaired. Every sack goes north." "What of the demolition?" a labourer asked. Cedric looked at the collapsed oven. "The building has begun the work for us." He walked away. Snow drifted through the open doorway and settled on the fallen stones. Agnes sat beside the wall, while Mara cleaned Ansel's wound. It was deep, but not fatal. The prior's left arm moved badly, and he winced whenever he tried to lift it. Agnes wanted to help. Mara stopped her with one look. "You have done enough without asking." The words contained no cruelty, only truth. Agnes lowered her hands. By afternoon, the travellers had been moved into the stable, the grain carts covered, and the bakehouse doors barred with an iron chain. Agnes sat beneath the remaining stable roof, with a blanket around her shoulders. Her back throbbed. Across the yard, soldiers repaired the cart axle under Mara's direction. She showed them where to brace the wood and how to warm the iron collar before fitting it. Cedric had released her because he needed her skill. Agnes had nearly killed Ansel because she believed only she could protect the evidence. The similarity was unbearable. Prior Ansel sat beside her, one arm bound to his chest. "You should be lying down," Agnes said. "So should you." "I am sorry. I know. That is not enough." "No." He looked toward the chained bakehouse. "The marks are damaged." "Yes." "The levy copy is in Cedric's coat." "Yes." "The oven may no longer function." Agnes closed her eyes. "Yes." Ansel waited. She knew what he wanted her to understand. She did not want to understand it. "A service is not a single stone," he said at last. The stones were proof, part of it, the clearest part. Perhaps. Agnes opened her eyes. Ansel nodded toward the yard. Mara's token still exists. So does the Priory roll, so do the village levies, so does every family that carried a first loaf here after the fire. Cedric will call that memory. Then make it more than memory. How? Ask them. Agnes looked at him. She had always been the woman with answers. Ask them felt like surrender. Perhaps that was why it mattered. When the axle was secured, Mara tested the wheel twice. Then she ordered the soldiers to unload 4 sacks before moving the cart. Cedric objected. The cart carried them before. The axle broke before. The road is level from here to Greywatch. The road is ice beneath snow. Cedric looked toward Agnes. For once, Agnes did not intervene. Mara pointed to the second cart. Move 2 sacks there. Put 2 on pack horses, or leave them, but I will not bury another horse, because a clerk prefers 1 neat total. Cedric's face hardened. Then he gave the order to redistribute the load. Mara came to the stable after dusk. Agnes stood. Pain tightened across her back. Mara noticed but offered no help. I lied, Agnes said. Yes, I removed the bricks because I believed Cedric would destroy them. I know why. I did not trust you with the decision. No. Or Ansel. No. Agnes looked toward the chained building. I have spent my life solving problems before anyone noticed they existed. That does not mean the problems belong to you. Agnes had no answer. Mara sat on an overturned bucket. My husband used to do the same thing, she said. If the roof leaked, he climbed it alone in rain. If the wheel cracked, he worked through the night rather than wake me. He called it protecting us. What happened? He went north with a winter levy because he had told no one how badly his lungs had become. Mara's fingers closed around the copper token. He died where no one knew what medicine he needed. Agnes sat opposite her. I am sorry. I do not need sorrow from the crown. I am not the crown. You were yesterday. The words hurt because they were partly true. Agnes had never worn jewels or commanded soldiers, but she had served the palace so long that she had learned its worst habit, deciding for people while calling it service. What do you need? Agnes asked. Mara looked at her carefully. It was the first time Agnes had asked, without already preparing the answer. I need you to stop acting as though trusting us is another burden you must spare us. Agnes nodded. Outside, the wind strengthened. The chained bakehouse groaned. Agnes rose. Will you gather the village representatives? Mara's expression remained guarded. For what? To inspect everything. Cedric sealed the building. The exterior remains. And the oven. We tell them what I damaged. We tell them why. We do not ask them to pretend the stones were untouched. Mara considered. Who leads the inspection? No one alone. That answer changed something. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But possibility. The next morning, Mara rode south with 2 village boys and returned by evening with 5 representatives. More came the following day. They brought copper tokens wrapped in cloth, tucked beneath shirts, or tied to belts. A fish from Reedmere, a bell from Bell Hollow, a wheel from Carrow Ford, a sheaf from Renford, a crescent from Moonfield, 12 symbols in all. Some tokens were worn almost smooth. One had been pierced and used as a cradle charm, another had served as a weight on a loom. An old woman from Bell Hollow brought a round loaf marked with a pressed thumbprint. My mother baked the first loaf after harvest, she said. She carried it here every year, even after the fire. Left it on the step. Why? Agnes asked. The woman shrugged. She said a promise dies only when both sides stop keeping it. Other villagers had done the same. Not all every year. Not always at Ashmore. Some left loaves at the Priory when snow blocked the upper road. Some sent timber bundles bearing village marks. Others kept tokens without remembering the exact exchange. Agnes recorded nothing herself. Prior Ansel, his injured arm resting in a sling, dictated while 2 younger brothers wrote duplicate accounts in open view. Every person gave a name. Every token was sketched. Every custom was described with its uncertainty intact. When memories differed, both versions were written. Cedric arrived during the inspection. He found villagers measuring the exterior loading platform, while Hob Rennick held the cord. "What is this?" "A joint inspection," Agnes said. "Of sealed crown property, of the stones outside it, the tokens held by the villages, and the levies recorded by the Priory." He looked at Hob. The soldier straightened. "I was ordered to prevent entry, sir. No one entered." Cedric's gaze moved over the gathering. "You are turning confusion into rebellion." Mara stepped forward. "No one has refused the fort grain." "Not yet." Agnes held out a copy of the village accounts. "Read them. I have read enough village grievance to know its shape. Then read the parts where they offer timber, labour, milling, and carts." That stopped him. The representatives had not merely asserted a right to bread. They had listed what each village could contribute. Oakmere offered mill hours before the stream froze. Belmere offered hand-milling crews. Bracken Hollow offered 2 carts, if overloaded axles were forbidden. Reedmere offered dried fish for travellers, so grain would stretch farther. Moonfield had little grain, but plenty of peat for fuel. The arrangement was imperfect. It depended on weather, labour, trust, and honest measurement. That made it more real than Cedric's tidy tables. He read the first page, then the second. "You expect military supply to depend on voluntary promises." Agnes shook her head. "The villages already owe levies. I propose that what they owe be named, witnessed, and matched to what the Crown owes in return. The Crown owes defence, and bread when its own road closes." Cedric folded the pages. Before he could answer, a horn sounded from the northern ridge. 1 blast, then 2. Hob turned toward the road. A rider emerged through the snow, horse lathered and stumbling. The messenger nearly fell from the saddle. "Greywatch Road is gone," he gasped. Drift took the lower cut. Supply convoy trapped north of the split. 20 soldiers, 3 carters, families from Stonebridge. Cedric caught his arm. "How much grain with them?" 6 carts. Injuries. 1 broken leg. Frostbite. No shelter. Sir Rowan Ashcombe had sent a written request, sealed in blue wax. Cedric opened it. His face tightened as he read. "What does it say?" Agnes asked. "That is military correspondence." The messenger answered anyway. "They need fire, shelter, and bread." Cedric looked at him sharply. The young man lowered his eyes. The storm gathered through the afternoon. Snow swallowed the road markers. The wind pushed drifts against the bakehouse doors and covered the red demolition marks. Cedric ordered the trapped convoy to remain, where the road widened enough to avoid avalanche danger. Soldiers from Ashmore would guide people back on foot. "Back to what?" Mara asked. "The stable is full. The Priory, 4 miles south with children in this wind." Cedric looked toward the chained bakehouse. For the first time since the collapse, uncertainty entered his face. Agnes saw it. "The western rooms are still sound," she said. "The oven vault failed. The main oven vault failed. The cooling room and side chamber did not. You nearly killed Ansel." "Yes." She did not soften it. She did not blame Frost. "I was wrong. That does not make the storm less cold." Cedric looked at the chain. "Open it," he ordered. The soldiers removed the seal. Snow had blown through the broken roof. Dust covered the work table. Fallen stones filled half the oven mouth. Agnes entered with Mara, Hob, Ansel, 2 village masons, and 1 of Cedric's clerks. This time, she did not decide alone. They inspected the walls. The western chamber remained stable. The cooling room could shelter 20 people if the loose plaster was cleared. The main oven was damaged but not destroyed. Half the baking floor remained beneath the fallen vault. The secondary flue still drew air. A mason named Jory knelt near the crack. "You cannot fire the whole chamber. I know. You might fire the left half if we block the broken side." "With what?" "Stone, clay, and wet wool, over timber braces." Agnes looked at the villagers. "Can it be done before night?" Jory shrugged. "With enough hands." Cedric stood in the doorway. "No." Agnes turned. The convoy needs bread. They carry grain. They carry whole grain and no working oven. They can boil it. In what pots? Over what sheltered fire? How many hours before frozen children can eat? Cedric's mouth tightened. We bring them here, give them hot gruel, and move them south when the wind falls. Then, open one sack. No. A murmur moved through the villagers. Cedric raised his voice. The convoy grain is assigned to Greywatch. Sir Rowan's written request remained in his hand. Agnes walked toward him. Assigned grain cannot march without carters. They are soldiers' supplies. Carters drive the carts. The army protects them. And tonight, they protect the army by keeping its grain from freezing in a drift. Cedric looked toward Mara. She said nothing. Agnes continued. Your Fort Baker sent figures. Cedric turned sharply toward Hob. The soldier handed Agnes a board marked with Pelenor's writing. Agnes read aloud. Greywatch's main oven produces 400 loaves per day when fully crewed. The oven is cracked. Fuel use has doubled. Flour remaining, 11 days at current issue. Whole grain remaining, 26 days if milled without loss. Cedric seized the board. How did this arrive? Relay rider, Hob said. Before the lower cut vanished, Agnes pointed to the final line. Pella asks for dry flour, not wet sacks. She cannot mill quickly enough inside the fort. Cedric read in silence. The army needs this grain, he said. Yes. Then you admit it. I always admitted it. Agnes stood beneath the broken vault. What I reject is your belief that feeding anyone else weakens the army. She pointed toward the road. Hungry carters cannot move grain. Frozen stable hands cannot tend horses. Villagers who see soldiers take every sack will hide the next harvest. You are defending a fort as though it floats above the land. The wind struck the roof. Loose snow poured through a gap. Cedric looked around at the villagers, soldiers, travellers, and broken oven. What do you propose? An open measure. Agnes's voice carried through the chamber. 1 military sack. 1 village fuel allotment. Labour from both. Every handful recorded. We bake enough for the stranded people and the rescue party. The remainder stays sealed. 1 sack will not feed them all. It will if mixed with barley meal, peas, and the grain swept from damaged bags. Poor bread. Living bread. Cedric looked at Sir Rowan's letter again. Agnes held out her hand. Give me written permission. So you can claim the crown recognised the old duty? No. She shook her head. So no one can say later that I stole the flour. He understood the difference. That mattered. Cedric summoned his clerk. The order he dictated was narrow. 1 sack of wheat flour and 1 sack of barley could be opened for emergency use. All measures were to be witnessed by a Greywatch soldier, a Priory brother, and 2 village representatives. Nothing in the order recognised ownership, custom, or permanent right. Agnes accepted it. For tonight, Cedric said. For tonight, she agreed. Work began. The village masons cleared the fallen stones, while soldiers carried timber braces from the ruined stable. Mara organised the carts into a curved wall outside the western entrance, breaking the wind and creating a sheltered loading space. Prior Ansel and the royal clerk set up side by side at the work table. Every sack was weighed before opening. Every measure was called aloud. No one trusted anyone completely. That was why the accounting worked. Agnes examined the surviving oven floor. The left side had held beneath the collapse. The secondary air channel still opened through the western wall. If the damaged side was blocked with stone and clay, heat could be contained in a chamber half the original size. Jory the mason shook his head. It may crack when hot. It will crack, Agnes said. He looked at her. She continued. The question is whether it cracks slowly enough. That is not reassuring. It is honest. They built the temporary wall. Wet wool was wrapped around timber braces to slow burning. Clay was pressed into gaps. Iron baking plates from the ruined shelves were laid across uneven stones. Agnes tested the flue with a twist of dry grass. The smoke drew upward. Weakly. But it drew. Mara arrived carrying split wood. Moonfield Pete is coming. How long? An hour if the sled does not overturn. We cannot wait. Agnes selected the driest pieces. Small fire first. The old instinct returned. Not command as performance. Command as sequence. Jory, watch the crownstone. Hob, no one enters once the second firing begins. Mara, divide the travellers by need. Children, injured, carters, soldiers. Ansel, record names only after everyone is warm. No one stands in a snowstorm to satisfy a clerk. Cedric watched from the doorway. Agnes turned to him. Your men carry water. He hesitated, then nodded. The first fire smoked. The second caught. Heat crept through the damaged chamber. A thin crack appeared above the temporary wall. Jory marked its end with charcoal. If it moves past that line, we stop, Agnes agreed. They mixed wheat with barley, ground peas, salt from the Priory, and a little rendered fat contributed by a merchant. The dough was rough. It stuck to cold fingers. Agnes showed the soldiers how to knead with the heel of the hand. Mara laughed when one tried to punch the dough as though it were an enemy. The laughter spread, not because anything was safe, because fear had loosened enough to let people breathe. The rescue party returned after dark. They brought the stranded travellers in groups, tied together by ropes so no one vanished into the snow. One soldier carried a child inside his cloak. A carter limped between two villagers. Sir Rowan Ashcombe entered last. He was broad-shouldered, grey at the temples, and exhausted enough to ignore ceremony. Snow clung to his beard. Which of you is Agnes Vale? Agnes lifted flour-covered hands. I am. He looked toward the oven. That ruin is baking? Half of it. Will it hold? For tonight. That is becoming the answer to every question. It is the only honest answer the weather allows. Sir Rowan removed his gloves. Where do you need me? Cedric stared at him. You command Greywatch, and tonight Greywatch needs bread. Sir Rowan joined the waterline. The first loaves were dense and uneven. Agnes listened when she opened the chamber. The temporary wall groaned. The marked crack extended half the length of her smallest finger. Jory shook his head. One more firing. We need 3. You may get 2. Agnes recalculated. Smaller loaves baked faster. Flat rounds required less heat. She ordered the next batch divided and thinned. The villagers adjusted. No argument. No secrecy. Every change was spoken aloud. The second firing produced more bread than the first. The third nearly ended them. As the chamber heated, a brace shifted. Stone grated above the oven. Hob reached for the door. Agnes stopped him. No one enters. The baking plates can be replaced. The bread will burn. Bread can be replaced too. She waited. Every part of her wanted to go inside and fix it herself. She imagined the pry bar, Ansel's blood, Mara's face. Agnes remained outside. Jory and 2 masons braced the exterior with a timber lever. Mara closed the lower vent to reduce the fire. The groaning slowed. Agnes released a breath. We wait. Smoke leaked around the temporary wall. The loaves inside blackened at the edges, but the vault held. When they opened the chamber, the bread was scorched, dense, and fully baked. Agnes broke one loaf. Steam rose. She handed the first half to the child who had arrived inside the soldier's cloak. The second half she gave to the soldier. Then the distribution began. Children first. The injured. Carters. Stable hands. Soldiers on rescue duty. The rest, by equal measure. Cedric watched every loaf leave the cooling ledge. No civilians took more, because the crown had failed them. No soldiers seized bread, because they carried swords. Mara stood at the outer platform, with her copper token beside the measuring board. The old object had regained its meaning, not because anyone declared it sacred, because the system around it worked again. Near midnight, the last traveller received bread. 1/4 of the flour remained, more than Agnes had predicted. Cedric saw it. So, your estimate was wrong, he said. Yes, you made more bread. Yes. A lesser version of herself might have claimed she had known. Agnes did not. The barley absorbed less water than I expected, she said, and the flat loaves wasted less heat. Cedric looked toward the stacked bread. You admit error easily when it favors you. I am learning, he almost answered. Before he could, the storm began to weaken. By dawn, the sky over Greyglass Pass was a pale, exhausted blue. The road remained buried, but the wind had fallen. Smoke rose from Ashmore's broken chimney. Travellers slept in every dry corner. Soldiers shared blankets with carters. Village representatives gathered near the work table, reviewing the written measures with Cedric's clerk. Nothing about the scene resembled rebellion. That unsettled Cedric more than shouting would have. Sir Rowan stood with him outside. Agnes could not hear every word. She heard enough. The fort cannot hold without these roads, Rowan said. I know. Then stop treating everyone along them as a thief. You command soldiers. I count what keeps them alive, and she counts better. Cedric looked toward Agnes. That is not the point. It may be the only point that matters. A horn sounded from the northern road. Not an alarm, a royal approach. Cedric turned. Through the clearing mist came 6 mounted guards, followed by a covered carriage and another line of riders. Their cloaks bore the white heart of Queen Elswith. The Queen had been inspecting Greywatch before the storm. With the lower road partly cleared and Sir Rowan absent from the fort, she had come to learn why her commander, her quartermaster, and half the pass appeared to be gathered around a condemned bakehouse. The carriage stopped before Ashmore. Queen Elswith stepped down without waiting for a servant. She was 39, though the severity of her dark riding cloak made her seem older. Snow had dampened the fur at her collar. She wore no crown, only a narrow silver circlet. Everyone bowed or knelt. Agnes lowered herself with difficulty. Pain seized her back. The Queen noticed. Stand, she said. All of you. The ground is wet enough without ceremony. Her gaze moved over the damaged walls, the carts, the temporary windbreak, and the bread cooling on stone ledges. Quartermaster Vane, Your Majesty, I was told Ashmore was uninhabitable. It was, Your Majesty. The Queen looked at the smoke. And now, Cedric glanced at Agnes. Now, it is disputed. That is an administrative word for something everyone else finds exhausting. A few villagers lowered their heads to hide smiles. Queen Elswith entered the bakehouse. She stopped beneath the broken roof. Her eyes travelled to the fallen oven arch, the temporary wall, and the surviving marks. Who ordered this building reopened? Cedric answered. I authorised emergency use, after Sir Rowan's convoy became trapped. Who proposed it? Agnes stepped forward. I did, Your Majesty. The Queen studied her. Agnes Vale. Agnes was surprised. You know my name. I have eaten bread from your ovens since childhood. Not bread you ever thanked me for, Agnes thought. She did not say it. The Queen looked toward the Blackened Key hanging from Agnes's belt. I also signed a household reduction 3 weeks ago. Agnes met her eyes. Then Your Majesty signed away my place. A ripple of discomfort passed through the royal attendants. Cedric looked at Agnes, as though she had stepped onto a blade. Queen Elswith did not rebuke her. I signed away many places, she said. I did not know all the names attached to them. That is how people disappear, Your Majesty. The Queen's face became still. Agnes almost apologised. Then she remembered the barred door. She remained silent. Queen Elswith walked to the oven. What are these marks? Agnes did not begin with a claim. She began with what could be seen. 12 village symbols, ration cuts beneath each, 12 cooling niches, 3 loading positions, a secondary flue designed for continuous firing. She showed the surviving thorn branch, then the loose brick she had removed. This stone was taken out by me. The Queen looked toward the collapsed arch. Before or after the fall? Before. Did removing it contribute? Yes, Your Majesty. The room quieted. Agnes continued. I feared the markings would be destroyed. I acted without consulting the masons or the village representatives. Prior Ansel was injured because of me. Then I lied and blamed Frost. Queen Elswith turned to Ansel. Is this true? It is. How badly were you hurt? I will live long enough to complain about it. The Queen looked back at Agnes. Why should I trust the evidence of a woman who altered it? You should not trust it alone. Agnes gestured toward the work table. Trust the village tokens that match the marks, the Priory levies that continued after the fire, the loading platform built for public distribution, the exterior burn pattern, the First Loaf custom, the witnesses who measured the grain used last night, the fort baker's figures, the bread your soldiers ate. The Queen moved to the table. Prior Ansell's 2 young clerks placed the duplicate accounts before her. Cedric added his own emergency order, and the measurement records from the baking. Mara laid 12 copper tokens in a row. The Queen touched the bell symbol. My grandmother had one of these in a cabinet at Whitebridge. Cedric looked surprised. Your Majesty, she called it a beggar's coin. No one could tell me why she kept it. The Queen examined the tokens, then the levy copies. Did the Crown continue collecting Ashmore grain? Yes, Cedric said. Under whose authority? The levy was incorporated into the Northern Defence accounts after the fire. By proclamation? No. Council order? No. Chancery amendment? Cedric's silence answered. The Queen looked towards Sir Rowan. Did Greywatch receive the grain? Some years, not all. Where did the rest go? General Northern Stores, Your Majesty. The Queen's expression hardened. So the Crown preserved the payment and forgot the duty. Cedric stepped forward. Your Majesty, the duty cannot simply be restored as it stood. The border has changed. The forts are larger. The grain is insufficient. Queen Elswith looked at him. That may be true. The villagers shifted uneasily. The Queen turned to Agnes. What do you ask? It was the moment Agnes had imagined since the marks first appeared beneath the soot. She could ask for Ashmore. A home. A title. Permanent authority. After 40 years of service, she could argue she had earned them. Instead, she looked at the 12 tokens. I ask that no one person own this duty. The Queen's eyebrows lifted. Agnes continued. The Crown owns the stone. The villages provide grain, timber, carts, milling, and labour. Greywatch needs a protected reserve. Travellers need relief when the pass closes. If one office controls all of it, the others become invisible. Cedric said, shared control produces delay. Agnes faced him. Secret control produced 19 years of levies for a dead oven. He did not answer. She returned her attention to the Queen. Let each village choose one representative. Let the Priory keep duplicate accounts. Let Greywatch appoint an officer to guard the military reserve. Let the keeper operate the ovens and publish every measure taken or baked. Publish? One royal clerk asked. Read aloud at the first market after each quarter, Agnes said. Most who pay cannot read, Queen Elswith considered. And who appoints the keeper? The council chooses from those able to perform the work. Mara looked at Agnes. The Queen saw it. You do not ask the office for yourself. I ask to be considered for it. Modest. No, Your Majesty. Agnes's voice remained steady. I believe I am the most qualified person here. I simply do not believe qualification should become ownership. A faint smile touched the Queen's mouth. Cedric stepped closer. Your Majesty, we face a possible invasion. This is not the season to test village government, nor is it the season to discover that my soldiers cannot eat because my officials cannot distinguish a sack from the same sack recorded 3 times. Cedric went pale. The Queen looked at Agnes. Is that accusation true? Agnes answered carefully. Some of the northern totals combine departure, weighing, and assignment records. Damp losses were deducted in more than one table. The actual reserve must be recounted, Cedric said. The system can be corrected without dismantling military authority. I agree, Agnes said. He looked at her, startled. She continued. Cedric Vane knows the forts, roads, levy dates, and storage agreements better than anyone here. Removing him during mobilization would create greater danger. Mara's face tightened. Some villagers murmured. Cedric himself looked almost offended by the defense. Agnes did not stop. But his accounts must be open to those whose grain he takes. His orders must state what is owed, why it is owed, and when the duty ends. Authority without witness has already burned this place once. The Queen walked into the oven. Her guards protested. She ignored them. Agnes followed with a lantern. Inside, surviving marks curved along the soot-blackened wall. The temporary partition divided old ruin from last night's fire. Queen Elswith touched the chisel-damaged royal emblem. Who tried to remove this? We do not know. Can it be restored? Carving can, Agnes said. The promise cannot be restored by stone alone. The Queen looked back at the open doorway. 19 years earlier, hungry villagers had stood outside while royal grain remained behind barred wood. Now soldiers, carters, widows, monks, children, and officials filled the chamber together. What happened to the old doors? The Queen asked. Burned, Agnes said. Then the new ones remain open whenever relief bread is issued. Cedric drew breath. Your Majesty, security, may stand outside an open door. She stepped from the oven. Her judgment took most of the morning. The Ashmore levy would be suspended until each village's contribution was reviewed. No grain would be collected under a dead maintenance heading. A new charter would establish 3 separate stores: military grain, emergency flour, and village contributions for operating the bakehouse. No store could be opened without 2 witnesses from different authorities. Greywatch would retain control of its defense reserve. The village council would control relief distribution. The Priory would keep duplicate accounts. Cedric would remain royal quartermaster, but every district ledger would be reconciled by shipment rather than by separate departmental totals. Quarterly figures would be read publicly at market. He accepted the order with a bow. His face revealed nothing. Queen Elswith turned to Agnes. The keeper shall serve 3 years before another choosing. Agnes nodded. The villages will select the first keeper in 7 days. Mara spoke before ceremony could swallow the moment. We choose Agnes. Several representatives answered at once. So do we. Bell Hollow's old woman raised her token. Let the oven vote. It already knows her. Even Sir Rowan laughed. The Queen looked at Agnes. Do you accept? Agnes looked around the bakehouse. At the fallen stones, at Ansel's bandaged arm, at the marks she had nearly destroyed trying to save alone, at Mara, who had not forgiven everything, but had remained. Yes, Your Majesty. Queen Elswith held up one hand. For 3 years. For 3 years, Agnes agreed. And you will answer to the council. I would have it no other way. The Queen looked toward the entrance. What names shall be carved above the new doors? A royal clerk prepared to write. Agnes looked at the 12 tokens. All 12 villages. The clerk waited. And beneath them, the Queen asked. Agnes thought of the plaque, blaming a starving mob. No names of kings. Cedric glanced at her. The Queen's mouth curved slightly. What then? Agnes answered. Bread for both sides of the door. Work began before the royal party left. The Queen ordered carpenters from Greywatch to remain at Ashmore. Sir Rowan released 2 army masons and a wagon of sound timber. The villagers contributed labour according to what each could spare. No one pretended the restoration would be easy. The eastern wall had shifted. The roof required new beams. The main oven had to be dismantled stone by stone and rebuilt around the surviving foundation. Agnes did not touch a structural brick without Jory's approval. The first time she asked, he stared at her long enough to make certain she meant it. Then he showed her how the inner facing carried weight into the arch. Prior Ansel returned to the Priory, but came twice each week with copied accounts and complaints about his shoulder. Mara took charge of the carts. Cedric objected when the council proposed paying her from the transport levy. Mara placed the repaired axle collar on his desk. This is what happens when your tables weigh more than wood can carry. The council approved her wage. Cedric did not object a second time. He and Agnes met often during the winter. Their arguments became shorter, not because they agreed more, because both learned to state the real question sooner. When Cedric requested 6 additional sacks for Greywatch, Agnes asked for oven capacity, milling time, and horse condition before answering. When Agnes requested more emergency flour, Cedric asked how many travellers had used the pass and how much village grain remained. Neither called the other kind. Neither expected kindness. They built something more reliable, a method of being questioned. Master Holland sent one letter from the palace kitchens. It requested Agnes's advice on storing onions through a damp winter. Agnes read it twice. Then she wrote the answer and signed it. Agnes Vale, keeper of Ashmore Bakehouse, by choice of the 12 villagers. She did not return. By the deepest part of winter, the bakehouse roof was sealed. The western chamber became a traveller's room, with straw beds and hooks for wet cloaks. The old loading platform was repaired. A narrow office near the entrance held 3 ledgers, one for village contributions, one for military grain, and one for relief bread. Each had 2 copies. One stayed at Ashmore, one went to the Priory. The Grey Watch figures were read aloud in Belmere's Market Square, before a crowd that interrupted whenever the clerk used words no one understood. Cedric hated the interruptions. He answered every one. Agnes's back healed slowly. Some mornings, she could not bend far enough to lift the first dough bowl. At first, she hid the pain. Then Mara saw her. "You are doing it again." Agnes straightened. "Doing what?" "Deciding no one else should be troubled." Agnes handed the bowl to an apprentice. The girl was 17, sharp-tongued, and stronger than she looked. Agnes taught her to test dough by touch rather than by time. Prior Ansel sent 2 orphaned boys from the Priory to learn accounts and oven work. Bell Hollow sent a widow who knew how to preserve apples. Reedmere sent a fisherman's son who had never baked but could repair almost anything made of rope. Ashmore became noisy. Agnes had once believed peace meant no one complained. Now she learned that belonging often sounded like argument. 3 weeks after the royal judgment, the 12 village representatives gathered for the winter's first formal baking. Each child chosen by a village carried 1 copper token. The tokens were hung on new iron hooks beside the oven. The blackened key ring from the palace lay on the council table. Agnes had kept it all winter. The empty hooks no longer looked like loss. They looked like a warning. She placed the ring before the representatives. "These opened rooms where I worked," she said. "They never gave me a place there." Mara stood beside her. "What will you do with them?" "Let the council keep them. And the oven key." Agnes touched the single blackened key at her belt. "That one remains with the keeper. For 3 years," Mara reminded her. Agnes smiled. For 3 years. The children lined up beside the rebuilt oven. Above the doors, the names of the 12 villages had been carved into pale stone. Beneath them were the words, "Bread for both sides of the door." No royal emblem stood above the inscription. Queen Elswith's white heart appeared on a small side tablet, equal in size to the marks of the villages, the Priory and Grey Watch. The first batch went into the oven at dawn. Snow fell beyond the open doors. Agnes waited beside the hearth, feeling heat settle into the new stones. She listened for cracks. There were none. When the loaves were ready, the apprentice opened the chamber. Warm air filled the bakehouse. The first loaf was placed in Agnes's hands. It was round, dark-crusted, and marked with 12 shallow cuts around its edge. Years earlier, she would have carried it to the highest table. She would have waited behind a noble chair while someone else broke it. Instead, Agnes carried the loaf to the doorway. Travellers stood outside, beside villagers, soldiers, carters, and children. Mara waited nearest the step. Agnes broke the bread in half. She gave one side to a Grey Watch soldier. The other she gave to Bell Hollow's oldest widow. Then she divided what remained among the children. Snow gathered on the road. The door stayed open. Mara watched Agnes brush flour from her hands. "You know," she said, "remaining somewhere is not the same as begging to be kept." Agnes looked at the rebuilt oven, the hanging tokens, and the people filling the room with voices. For 40 years, she had believed a home was a place powerful people allowed her to occupy because she caused no trouble. Ashmore had taught her otherwise. A home was a place where her choices mattered enough to be questioned, where her mistakes had consequences and did not erase her worth, where service moved in both directions. Agnes reached for the next loaf. Outside, the winter road vanished beneath fresh snow. Inside, no one waited hungry behind a barred door.